You owe us this house, my daughter-in-law, Brenda, said, pouring herself a cup of coffee in my kitchen as if the whole thing had already been decided. I just smiled quietly. What she mistook for giving in was actually the exact moment I decided to dismantle her free ride, piece by piece. You owe us this house, my daughter-in-law, Brenda, said, pouring herself a cup of coffee from my machine without even asking. Right then, on a completely ordinary Tuesday morning in my own home just outside Chicago, it hit me my kindness had been taken for weakness. Brenda and my son, Alan, had been living rent-free in the upstairs apartment of my house for 2 years, supposedly saving up to buy their own place. But instead of saving, they had apparently decided that my property was theirs for the taking. Alan just sat there at the kitchen table, staring blankly at his phone, staying silent the way he always did whenever his wife started talking. Brenda set her mug down hard on the counter and looked at me with a gaze that expected zero pushback. She casually informed me that this house was far too big for an older, single woman living by herself. She said they'd already drawn up plans to remodel the first floor to make room for a second child, according to her. The small attic apartment upstairs would be plenty of space for me, and it would be much quieter anyway. Not a single word of appreciation. Not one question about what I wanted. It was a straight-up hostile takeover of my living space. I felt a cold wave of clarity wash over me. No anger, no shaking, just the absolute certainty that a major line had been crossed. I looked Brenda straight in the eye, smoothed out my kitchen towel, and said calmly, "I'll think about it." She smirked triumphantly, thinking she'd already won the match. She had no clue that my quiet nod was actually the beginning of the end of her comfortable little setup. Once they both left for work, I walked through the rooms my late husband and I had built together. I was never going to give up this house, but I was also done letting them take it for granted. I headed straight to the desk in my study and pulled out the original paperwork. It was time to rearrange things, and on a scale Brenda never saw coming. The key to true independence isn't loud arguments. It's quiet, decisive action. That very afternoon, I dug out all the utility bills. Ever since Alan and Brenda moved in, I had been footing the bill for the entire house. Electricity, gas, water, trash. Everything came out of my checking account, while the two of them blew their money on expensive vacations and high-end dinners. That was stopping immediately. And without any big announcements, I called the utility companies to finally separate the meters for the top floor, since the house had originally been built as a duplex. The infrastructure was already there. All it took was a formal request to activate it. I arranged for the upstairs bills to be sent separately starting next month, issued directly in my son's name. It was the first step in forcing them to face the real cost of living. Next, I changed up our daily routine. Up until now, I'd been cooking dinner for everyone almost every night, doing their laundry, and keeping up with the yard work while they relaxed after work. I bought a small, sleek mini fridge for my own bedroom and decided the downstairs kitchen was strictly for my own meals from now on. If they wanted to claim my house, they were going to have to experience the actual work it takes to run a household. That evening, we sat in the living room for a few minutes. Brenda was already talking about paint swatches for my current living room, completely ignoring the fact that I was sitting right there. Alan just gave a lazy nod. I smiled politely, stayed out of the conversation, and went to bed early. I slept incredibly well that night, knowing the technicians were already scheduled to split the meters next week. They felt perfectly secure, but the foundation of their illusion was already cracking. The technician appointment went off without a hitch. Within a few hours, the utility lines were completely separated when Alan and Brenda got home that evening. They found an official notice from the electric company sitting on the kitchen island. I had left it right there on purpose. Brenda opened the envelope, and I watched from the hallway as her face went from total indifference to absolute confusion. She read the letter twice before shoving it in Alan's face. Mom, what is this supposed to mean? Alan asked, walking out to meet me in the hall. He sounded a bit stressed. It says here we have to set up our own gas and electric account starting next month. I looked at him calmly and said in a firm tone, That's right, Alan. Since you both already look at this house as your future property, it's time you took responsibility for your own utility usage. It eases my budget and gets you ready for the real world. Brenda marched over, her eyes narrowing. This wasn't the deal we're trying to save for a down payment, and these extra bills are going to completely set us back. She complained. Her logic was laughable. They wanted to take my house, but they were whining about paying for the energy they used to live in it. I refused to argue. It's a fair adjustment. I can't and won't subsidize your lifestyle anymore, I said evenly. She realized her usual guilt trips weren't working against my calm demeanor. Annoyed, she spun on her heel and stomped upstairs, with Alan following her like a shadow. That night, I could hear the muffled, tense murmur of their voices through the ceiling. They were arguing, which was rare for them. The first step was complete. They needed to understand that living under my roof wasn't a free vacation anymore, and this was just the beginning. The next day, I took the next step. I called a locksmith and changed the locks on both the front door and the interior door leading to my downstairs living area. It was no longer acceptable for Brenda to just barge into my apartment whenever she pleased to grab things or invade my privacy. When she tried to use her old key that afternoon and it wouldn't turn, she started knocking loudly. I opened the door just a crack and looked at her pleasantly. My key isn't working, she said, looking visibly annoyed. I had the locks changed, I explained calmly. It's for privacy and to keep our spaces clear. Since you live upstairs and I live down here, it's better if everyone has their own locked apartment. If you need something, just ring the bell. Brenda let out an incredulous scoff. We're family. Why are you locking us out? This is ridiculous. I stayed completely unbothered. It's not ridiculous. It's a healthy boundary. Being family means respecting each other's personal space. I handed her the new key, which only worked for the main front entrance and their upstairs door. She snatched it from my hand. A mix of anger and helplessness written all over her face. Her controlling behavior was suddenly useless because I had cut off her physical access to my daily life. On top of that, I stopped cooking for them entirely. When Alan asked me that evening what was for dinner, I pointed to the empty, cold stove. I'm only cooking for myself from now on. Alan, you're both adults, and it's time you managed your own meals. He looked at me with wide, disappointed eyes, but he just nodded silently. Their comfortable little bubble was bursting at the seams, and they were finally starting to realize the power dynamic in this house had permanently shifted. The changes made an impact fast. Over the next few days, the upstairs apartment was oddly quiet. Brenda tried to play a new card to punish me the silent treatment. Whenever we crossed paths in the entryway, she looked right through me. That was fine by me. It saved me from dealing with pointless small talk. Instead, I used my newfound free time to focus on my own life, which I had put on the back burner for way too short a time. I used to watch my 5-year-old grandson, Leo, 3 days a week so they could go out or hit the gym. That Friday, Brenda showed up at my door with Leo, ready to drop him off like she always did. I gently blocked the doorway, knelt down to give my grandson a warm hug, and then looked up at Brenda. I have plans today. Brenda, I'm spending the afternoon out on the town. She stared at me, completely flabbergasted. But it's Friday. You always watch him on Fridays. I have an appointment at the salon. I shook my head. You should have asked me first. I'm not just automatically available anymore. My schedule is fully booked today. Without waiting for an answer, I grabbed my coat and purse, stepped right past her, and headed to my car. Leo gave me a cheerful wave, while Brenda stood in the driveway looking like she'd been struck by lightning. I drove out to meet an old friend I hadn't seen in months. We grabbed lunch, laughed for hours, and I completely enjoyed being away from the tension at home. It felt incredible to own my own time again. When I got back that evening, the upstairs lights were on, and the faint smell of burnt dinner drifted down. They were forcing themselves to figure it out. It was crystal clear that without my constant, unpaid labor, their daily life barely functioned. If you enjoy spending time with quiet revenge, we would like to make a small request. Our team works carefully to select, edit, review, and produce each story. While AI tools may assist some parts of the process, every story is ultimately guided and checked by real people who care deeply about the quality of what we share. Since our YouTube monetization is not currently active, some viewers have asked whether there is another way to support the channel. If you feel comfortable doing so, you can support Quiet Revenge with the cost of a small cup of coffee. Patreon https://www.patreon.com/quiet revenge family. Ko-fi https://ko-fi.com/thestry family. PayPal https://www.paypal.com/paypalme/kanhuangmin. Whether you choose to contribute or simply continue watching, we are sincerely grateful for your time, kindness, and support. While Alan and Brenda were struggling with the basic realities of adulthood, I was quietly setting the final stage of my plan in motion. The house belonged to me. But having two people under my roof who didn't respect me was ruining the atmosphere. I wanted peace, but I didn't want to live in a constant battleground. I decided to look for a new living arrangement for myself. Without breathing a word of it to either of them, I quietly listed the first-floor apartment for rent on a local real estate site. Since the space was large, beautifully maintained, and had no stairs, I knew it would generate a ton of interest. At the same time, I started apartment hunting for a smaller, modern condo closer to the city center. I wanted something low maintenance with a nice balcony, within walking distance of coffee shops and local theaters. The rental income from the first floor would easily cover my new lifestyle. Within 48 hours, my inbox was flooded with inquiries from great, qualified applicants. I chose a quiet, pleasant retired school teacher named Eleanor Collins, who seemed like the perfect fit for the house. We met up at a quiet diner to go over the details. She fell in love with the place and was more than ready to cut a check for the security deposit and the first month's rent right then and there. We set up an official walkthrough for the coming weekend. I scheduled her visit for a Saturday morning when I knew Alan and Brenda were taking a day trip with Brenda's parents. Eleanor looked over the apartment, loved it, and we signed the lease right there at the kitchen table. Her move-in date was set for the first of the month after next. Everything was moving like clockwork. The trap of reality was set. And Brenda still had absolutely no idea her grand plans for my first floor were already dead in the water. Brenda clearly assumed the changes of the past few weeks were just a temporary phase I was going through. She had adjusted to the split utility bills and the locked doors, but in her mind, she still believed the house would eventually be handed over to them. On Sunday evening, she decided it was time to talk. She marched into my living room with Alan trailing behind, her voice carrying a patronizing, pitying tone that made me smile inside. "We've been thinking, Valerie," she started, sitting down on my sofa without being asked. "It's pretty obvious that keeping up with this place is getting to be too much for you. You seem stressed. We should really schedule an appointment to transfer the deed over to us soon. That way, we can handle the maintenance, and you won't have to worry about a thing. It's honestly what's best for your future." Alan just stared at the floor, unable to look me in the eye. I didn't feel a speck of anger, only a deep, quiet satisfaction knowing what was coming. I took a sip of my tea and looked her dead in the eye. "I appreciate your sudden concern for my future, Brenda, but I've already taken care of all my living arrangements. You don't need to worry about this house or my responsibilities ever again. Everything is handled." She completely misread my calm demeanor as compliance. "Well, I'm glad you're finally being reasonable," she said with a cold smile. "We can start packing up this living room next weekend then." I just smiled back and said nothing about her weekend plans. She genuinely thought she had worn me down. In reality, I had pulled the strings so tight that the next time she made a move, she was going to trip right over them. The upcoming week was going to bring the reality check I had so carefully prepared. It was a bright, sunny Thursday evening when the tables finally turned. I had asked Alan and Brenda to come downstairs for a quick chat in my living room. 2 official documents were lying flat on the coffee table. When they walked in, Brenda was in a fantastic mood. She was probably expecting me to hand over the paperwork to transfer the house deed. She sat down with a flourish, while Alan followed hesitantly. "I wanted to give you a formal update on the final plans for this house," I began, my voice steady, conversational, and completely factual. I slid the first document across the table. It was the signed lease agreement with Eleanor Collins. Brenda picked up the paper, her eyes scanning the first page, and the color instantly drained from her face. Her eyes went wide as she stared at the tenant's name and the upcoming move-in date. "What? What is this?" she stammered, her voice suddenly cracking and turning shrill. "You rented out the first floor, but that's our apartment. We were supposed to move down here." I shook my head gently. "It was never your apartment. Brenda, it's my property. Eleanor is moving in on the first of the month. She's a quiet tenant who is paying a very fair market rent, which will secure my retirement." Alan stared at the lease, completely stunned. "Mom, where are you supposed to live?" Then he asked, his voice shaking. I slid the second document forward. It was the closing paperwork for my new condo downtown. "I'm moving out too. Alan, I bought myself a beautiful condo that fits my new, independent lifestyle perfectly." Brenda bolted upright, knocking her chair backward. She finally realized her entire plan had completely collapsed. Brenda stood there trembling, her hands slammed onto her hips. "You can't do this," she practically screamed. "Where are we supposed to go? We can't afford our own place in this neighborhood if we have to pay the full utilities upstairs on top of everything else." Her usually composed face was completely twisted with rage and pure panic. The dream of a free, inherited house had officially evaporated. I stayed right where I was, looking up at her calmly. "You have a valid lease for the upstairs apartment, and I'm not evicting you. But starting next month, your rent is being adjusted to match the current market rate for this area. On top of that, you'll be sharing the property with Eleanor. She values her peace and quiet, and I expect you to be respectful neighbors." Alan just buried his face in his hands. "You're ruining us," Brenda whispered, but all the fire had drained out of her voice. She knew she had absolutely zero leverage left. I hadn't broken any laws, hadn't thrown a tantrum. I had simply acted as the rightful owner of my property. "I'm not ruining you," I said firmly. "I'm just expecting you to grow up. You took my generosity and treated it like an obligation. Now you have to deal with the reality of your own choices." They walked out of the room without another syllable. Over the next couple of weeks, I could hear them packing boxes and arguing through the walls. Brenda cut off all contact with me, but Alan looked like a different person, almost relieved that his wife's constant scheming had finally been stopped. I started sorting through my own belongings for the move. The heavy weight of the last 2 years lifted off my shoulders. And I couldn't wait for my new chapter. 2 months later, I was sitting on the balcony of my new 4th-floor condo. The view of the city skyline was absolutely gorgeous, and the quiet peace of my new home was exactly what my soul needed. My new life was simple, independent, and completely my own. I didn't have to justify my choices to anyone, and I didn't have to defend myself against ungrateful expectations. I had finally won my peace back. Eleanor sent me a text message yesterday afternoon. She mentioned she was settling into the first floor of the old house beautifully. She said Alan and Brenda were still living upstairs, but they were keeping a completely low profile and being incredibly quiet. They were paying their rent and utility bills exactly on time now, because they knew that if they slipped up even a little bit, I wouldn't hesitate to take action. Reality had finally taught them some humility. Alan came over to visit me by himself for the first time last week. He brought a beautiful bouquet of flowers. We had some coffee. And We just caught up on everyday things. He didn't offer a direct, formal apology, but the way he acted told me everything I needed to know. He finally understood. There's been no effort to reconcile with Brenda. And frankly, I don't care to. My boundaries are set in stone, and anyone who can't respect them doesn't get a seat at my table. I don't regret a single choice I made. Sometimes you have to make tough, practical moves to protect your own life. As I finish my coffee and watch the sky turn a deep, warm amber, a profound sense of peace washed over me. I hadn't lost my home at all. I had successfully protected my freedom and my self-respect. If you enjoy spending time with Quiet Revenge, we would like to make a small request. Our team works carefully to select, edit, review, and produce each story. While AI tools may assist some parts of the process, every story is ultimately guided and checked by real people who care deeply about the quality of what we share. Since our YouTube monetization is not currently active, some viewers have asked whether there is another way to support the channel. If you feel comfortable doing so, you can support Quiet Revenge with the cost of a small cup of coffee. Patreon https://www.patreon.com/Quiet Revenge Family. Ko-fi https://ko-fi.com/History Family. PayPal https://www.paypal.com/PayPalme/Kanhuangmin. Whether you choose to contribute or simply continue watching, we are sincerely grateful for your time, kindness, and support.